Hey guys, Magnet here, and welcome to episode 4 of How to Be a Better Starcraft Player. This episode will discuss how you can improve your game knowledge and plan or alter strategies during a game. We talked a little bit about build orders in the previous episode. We'll get to that in a second, but let's talk about the idea of strategy in a real-time strategy game. The obvious portion of strategy is just knowing what every unit is supposed to be doing on the battlefield. Every unit obeys some system of revolving counters, where it counters some unit, but another unit counters the first one, and so on. Unit compositions are designed to fill holes that a unit might create, so an army doesn't get hard countered by a different composition. Overall, strategy and especially unit compositions are an important component to winning battles. If you ever have any questions about how compositions fight one another, go to the arcade, search for the unit test map, and experiment. With all that said, unit compositions and strategies still take a backseat to both speed and macro. Without proper macro or the speed to manage everything, your strategy is severely weakened, almost to the point of it being unnecessary. The way we get to a desired unit composition is through a build order. Like we mentioned in the last episode, a build order is a good recipe to get to ideal places in a game without dying to things that are common in each matchup. And, even if it seems self-evident, the only way to properly run that build order is if you make workers, buildings, and units at the times that they are intended in the build order. Keep in mind that some build orders are very hard to use. Even I have avoided some build orders that I have seen players using simply because I don't have the speed and multitasking they require to run efficiently. Bear in mind your own limitations and try to find a build that works for you. Otherwise, you might get frustrated at your inability to use a build, which was probably designed for a higher level anyway. Also keep in mind that any build that is about harassment or dealing non-lethal damage only works if you continue to make things back at home. I know I harp on building workers a lot, but a build that is designed to kill 10 workers at your opponent's base only matters if you don't forget to produce 10 workers at home during the harassment. I see this all the time, even in Masters League. It's often ideal to find a build that is comfortable and keeps you safe while you gain an advantage, rather than trying to overcomplicate the game. While a build is designed to get certain units out at certain times, the only way this is meaningful is if you understand the metagame. Simply put, the metagame is the common way people play over a vast population. If you generally know what to expect from your opponent in most games based on their race, it allows for standard build orders and counter build orders to start surfacing. I like to think that any build order falls in one of three categories. The first category is a standard build, meaning that it has no obvious holes, and a pretty big majority of players will use some variation of it. Standard builds establish the metagame, because a lot of people see their solidarity and copy it in their own games. The second category is a counter meta build, meaning that it might have some holes, but it purposefully hard counters what is standard. Counter meta builds force the metagame to evolve in new directions, and make people question whether they should stick with what is standard. And finally, the last category is an outlier build, meaning that it's something that's basically never seen and is only used to try to catch people off guard. These kinds of builds are popular on ladder because it's impossible to predict what each person is going to do from game to game. Most importantly, if the opponent knows what's coming with an outlier build, it shouldn't work unless they really mess up. You can play the game however you like, but I will tell you that winning games based on gimmicks will only stunt your growth as a player. Any random player could practice a cheesy strategy and win enough to get Diamond or Masters if they do it right, but then once they start fighting people that are good enough to defend it or understand what's going on, the strategy will helplessly lose and the player won't feel any sense of reward anymore. In the long run, stable and standard play should always win out against cheese and gimmicks. A good build also has several transition points, which establishes a tree of reactions based on what you could scout. A robotic build that only does one thing and doesn't mold in some way or another to their opponent will lose a lot to outlier builds and even counter meta builds. It's a reality of the game that you need to know what your opponent is doing and make adjustments based on that. The more you understand why, the easier you'll be able to transition and make unscripted decisions. The only way you'll start to establish and get used to these trees of decisions is to practice and play against appropriate competition that will stress your ability to react. Ladder is an okay way to practice, but a better way is to find somebody of equal or greater skill that you can practice your builds on and see how they try to exploit it. As you get exploited, find ways to patch it up and continue on. This is how the overall metagame of Starcraft develops, and this is how professional matches are planned and played out. Episode 5 will talk more about how to practice properly and tailoring your practice based on what you need to improve upon. The next video is in this playlist, and a link is in the description below if you aren't watching from the playlist. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.